Welcome to Talking Pictures. My name is Christian Genzel. I am a filmmaker and film journalist from Salzburg, Austria. Talking Pictures is an interview series in which I talk to the people behind some of my favorite movies, from cult movie directors to character actors, from seasoned veterans to brilliant newcomers, from celebrated artists to filmmakers who haven't received the recognition they deserve. These folks have lots of fascinating stories to tell. As part of our focus on the video game adaptations of the 90s, I spoke to Jim Yukich, director of Double Dragon, an adaptation of the popular beat-em-up video game series. The movie came out in November 1994, 1.5 years after Super Mario Bros., and just a few weeks before Steven Souza's Street Fighter movie, so it's actually the second video game movie to be released. And just like Super Mario, it was a commercial and critical failure, even though the film is much better and more enjoyable than its reputation suggests. While Double Dragon was Jim Yukich's first movie, he had already established himself as a very prolific music video director. Jim shot videos for artists like Genesis, Phil Collins, Maiden, David Bowie, Kenny Loggins, Foreigner, Jeff Beck, Mike and the Mechanics, Pat Benatar, REO Speedwagon, Cheap Trick, Whitney Houston, and a ton of other famous musicians. He created Michael Jackson's Liberian Girl video, which featured superstar cameos by the likes of Steven Spielberg, Quincy Jones, John Travolta, Weird Al Yankovic, Richard Dreyfuss, Dan Aykroyd, and many others. While Jim has made only one more movie since Double Dragon, he remains busy creating concert videos for bands like Crosby, Stills and Nash, Def Leppard, and even Megadeth. In this episode, Jim shares how the Double Dragon movie came together. He talks about how he and producer Alan Schechter, actually a good friend of his, didn't quite see eye to eye on the tone of the movie, whether it should be a tough dystopian action picture or a cheerful and fun adventure for kids. Jim also recalls several of the problems the production ran into, like the original director of photography, Tony Mitchell, injuring himself right at the beginning and then trying to continue working on the film from a stretcher. He also talks about how the film turned out to be very popular on a small island in the Pacific. For more on the video game movies of the 90s, please check out our other interviews here on Talking Pictures, including an interview with Rocky Morton, co-director of Super Mario Bros., an interview with Steven Souza, writer and director of Street Fighter, and with Kevin Droney, the screenwriter of Mortal Kombat and Wing Commander. If you speak German, there's also an episode number 38 of our Lichtspielplatz podcast with in-depth discussions of all these movies. You can find us at talkingpicturespodcast.com. So here's Talking Pictures with director Jim Yukich about the making of Double Dragon.
It was interesting because when we were filming Double Dragon in Cincinnati, in Cleveland, we took one afternoon when we were shooting nights, and we went and saw Super Mario to see what the competition was going to be like, which was pretty funny. And the interesting thing that I found out about Super Mario, and I don't know how much you found out, maybe you found out more when you spoke to Rocky, but it was a real nightmare. I mean, all films are a nightmare. It's like, Alan Schechter, the guy who was one of our producers, always said it's like going to war shooting a movie, but Mario was particularly kind of a nightmare because my friend Dean Semler was the cinematographer. Mm-hmm. And at one point, he took over directing the film. So we kind of wanted to go and see, okay, how does this look? What happened? And they never really translate to exactly what people's hopes are, because the video game is, and it's just like listening to a song. And I did a lot of music videos over the years, and people, would get mad because in their mind they'd have like one image of the song, and then you do a video and it's a completely different kind of thing. So mm-hmm. I think that's kind of the same, the similarity in the sense that people that are so into certain things see it in their mind, and that's kind of that's a nice thing. But then when somebody adapts it, you can't expect it to be the exact same thing, because it just doesn't translate. I mean, there's, you're thinking in terms of exposition and backstory and everything else that you have to get into this little, 90-minute film. And that, one of our goals was to keep it short, because we wanted to, keep it interesting for kids and people with short attention spans. But the biggest problem that we had on our film, just jumping right into it, is that, first of all, we had multiple writers, and I don't know how much background you know about Double Dragon, but there was like three groups of writers on the movie. You know, when I got involved, it went from, you know, at first it was just you know, like Paul Dini, you know, came up with you know, the kind of like the original idea or concept with, you know, with Neil Schusterman, and I don't know if you know, or if you spoke to any of them or not, but I didn't even deal with them. That was like done before when I got there. Neil Schusterman was like the one that was like the writer, and then after that, we brought on this other writer, you know, Peter Gould, and his partner, and they took over the writing, and they kind of like rewrote the whole thing because the producers didn't like it, and the Schusterman version, and they wanted it a little bit more for kids. And then it got to the point where it was just, it worked, but it didn't have any life to it, any humor to it. So then we brought in another writer named Mark Brazil to just add like humor to it, basically, to make it more natural. And so with the combination of all those writers, that kind of dragged everything, you know, down, because you have all of a sudden you have, you know, 6 brains instead of like 1 brain in charge, you know. So it was like weird. It's you know, it's like if you had 6 people collaborating on, you know, on a project as opposed to just 1 or 2 visions, you know. And then beyond that, the producers didn't get along. I mean, they got along because they were brothers and they were friends, but you had producers. You had 2 producers that I never met. They just bought the property, Murphy, and I think one was named Murphy and the other one was named, I can't even remember what her name was. But I never met them, but the Shaw brothers, who were the main producers, they had different visions of it as well. They saw it as more of a, you know, kids action movie. And Alan Schechter, who was the kind of the, like, you know, lone gun that worked for Imperial, he saw it as more of an adult action, not adult, but more of an action film. You got to understand Alan's background. So Alan was Joel Silver's assistant for years. So Alan came from that. You know, let's everything's got to be real. The details, the explosions, the whole bit. So he was spending my money like crazy, getting these like weapons made and these custom things made, and the other producers had no idea, you know, that was going on. They saw it as more like, you know, a story, you know, like a cute story for kids. And so it ended up being somewhere in the middle, which didn't really, you know, wasn't one way or the other. It wasn't good enough to be like a Joel Silver film, and it wasn't, you know, kid friendly enough to be a kid film necessarily. And then towards the end, what happened in America was they have a rating system here, and it was rated at PG-13, which was, you know, it was almost an R rating for violence or something, which we found incredible because there was like no violence in this movie. I don't know if you know, back then, I guess it was considered violent back then. But so, you know, when I found out it was PG-13 even, I offered to come in and cut stuff out that, you know, that they're questioning, like if there was language or if there was any kind of thing that was violent, because nothing needed to be in the film except for stuff that related to the story. So, you know, I thought we could fix this because our audience of kids is not going to be able to go without their parents to see this film, you know, and Alan didn't want to fix it because he thought PG-13 would be kind of hipper and cooler because, you know, then adults and teenagers would think, oh, it's not just a Disney movie, you know, and so that was a kind of, you know, there was so many downfalls beyond the scenes of those kind of things that it's almost humor, you know, comical now as I look at it. You know, back then I was like upset about it all, but now it's like, okay, you know, I look back at the film now, and you know, there's times like years go by where I don't even think about the film, or when I haven't seen it, and then when I see bits and parts of it, I thought, well, I mean, I'm not really happy with the cinematography. Could have been a little bit better here and there, but it wasn't a bad kids movie. You know, it had its moments as a kids movie, and I wish we had more time to do a lot of the stuff. I look at stuff and I say, boy, we really cut back on this because we couldn't afford to do this. And, there's a lot of errors that I made because as a first-time director, I was getting bossed around like crazy by all these people. And again, in hindsight, which is easy to say, I would have put my foot down more and said, no, this is the way we want to do it, and I tried to compromise, and I found at the end you can't compromise between people that are at opposite ends of the spectrum. Pretty soon you end up with like nothing. So it was kind of a shame that way. But as far as the video game part of it, it had I think it had a potential because it had a built-in audience. It just didn't hit home like they thought it would. I don't know if you have anything particular you want to ask about anything, because I'm just kind of rambling at this point.
Yeah, I actually have a couple of things, but you already touched upon some of them. So you said that you weren't on board when the first draft was created by Paul Dini and Neil Schusterman, and then so. What I'm curious about is how you got involved in the first place with Double Dragon, and then what your vision for the film would have been, with all the different voices out there that say, okay, this is going to be this is going to be that.
Well, the way I got on board was Alan Schechter brought me on board. Alan was before he worked for Joel Silver, believe it or not, he worked for me as a production assistant. Oh. And he worked on a lot of my videos, a lot of my shows that I did, and we really got along well because he was the nicest guy. I mean, he was a film buff. He was, very loyal, and what he did was he went, when he went and worked for Joel Silver and got to the point where he became a producer, he wanted to bring me back in because we were friends from way back, kind of. So he actually brought me in. As far as what I would have done with the film, that's part of the problem. See, Alan brought me in, and Alan was the producer that wanted it to be an adult action film. Mm-hmm. And my thinking, I was leaning more towards the Shaw Brothers, where I thought this could be a great kids movie. Not like a sappy Disney kids movie, but like an intelligent kids movie where the humor could be enjoyed by kids and adults. In two different ways. Much like, I don't know if you ever saw the original movie of Willy Wonka, which, there's humor in that movie that appeals to both, kids think things are funny, but yet there's underlying meaning that adults could understand as well. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted it to be a great kids movie. And by the fact that Alan brought me in, it was very difficult for me to all of a sudden to like throw him under the bus, as they say, or turn on him and say, Alan, I don't want to do it your way. So it put me in a weird position, kind of, and that's part of the reason why I didn't make a big stand about how things should be done this way or that way, because I was fighting between a friend and and what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. That I was like caught in the middle. I don't know if you know much about the writers on the show, but it's pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know who Paul Dini is, right?
Yeah, the comic book author. He's one of the creators of Harley Quinn, actually.
Do you know who Peter Gould is, who came in as a second writing team?
Yeah, he is the creator of Better Call Saul. I think he was a producer on Breaking Bad, and then he created the spin-off show.
Yeah, he was the main head writer on Breaking Bad for years. So and then the third writer was Mark Brazil. Do you know who he is?
No.
Mark Brazil was a friend of mine who was a comedy writer who worked for my same management team, and I called them and said I need somebody to come in and basically beef up the dialogue and to add some jokes and make it a little bit funnier. And so they sent Mark Brazil over, and that was the first time I worked with Mark. And after Double Dragon, Mark created a show here called Third Rock from the Sun, which was a very popular show. And then he created a show called That 70s Show, which was huge in America, a huge TV show. And so it's interesting that all three kind of the writers ended up being like huge writers, you know, and yet the movie was not that great. You know?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of talent involved, so.
Yeah, basically that's what I mean. There was a lot of talent involved for what actually happened, but it was a fun movie. But it was like, you know, Alan Schechter would always say it's like going to war, you know, every day. These guys, I mean, the writers would write the scripts, you know, and Mark Brazil never wrote like too much of the storyline stuff. He would alter mostly dialogue and things to like make it feel better. But you know, they gave us the script, and a kids movie in America in those days, you had to keep it like around 90 minutes because, again, the attention span and kids won't sit through much more. At that time they didn't, and so we were at like 110 pages, you know, and they said, well, just shoot it and we'll cut out stuff. Well, you know what happens when you do that. All of a sudden it becomes choppy and it's a different story. I mean, it's not the same story. And then even at 110 pages, you'd have one thing in the middle of the page that says the fight begins. And the fight is not just a one sentence. That's like 3 or 4 minutes, you know? So even though it's only one page, you got the fight begins, and the theater scene that we shot, where Shuko comes through the back door and they chase his guys chase the brothers like up the balcony, and that took like 6 days to shoot because you know, because we had, you know, we were kind of like tight in this theater, and we were trying to get as much as we can, and the stunt coordinator was coming up with all these things that we had to shoot these little bits at a time, because like Scott Wolf, the one actor, was pretty athletic, but he wasn't a stunt man. Mark Dacascos was very athletic, you know, and so he could do all this stuff. So, but we were dealing with people that weren't really, you know, martial arts stunt people, you know, that could, you know, for this stuff. And the thing that says the fight begins bogged us down everywhere we went, because it was just, all of a sudden we're into this shooting this big scene where, as the story, you know, was already long. So there was a lot of problems from the beginning. I mean, I thought, again, personally, if I had put my foot down, I would have said we're not going to start shooting this thing until we have a 90-page script, at least just a 90-page script that we're all happy with, you know, and that never happened, because they wanted a lot of the reason, again, is they wanted to get it out there because Mario was coming out and all these other movies were coming out, and they wanted to jump in on that whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Were you familiar with the game at all?
I became familiar. Well, my nephews used to play it all the time. I had, you know, like relatives that you know, that played it growing up, and I never really played it, but I became familiar with it once I got hired to do the movie. I went, you know, and played it, and I talked to everybody I knew that knew about the game to just make sure that I kind of knew the difference in what we were doing. And it, you know, again, I could see right away, okay, here's the problem. The game, you got these two kind of adults, and, you know, there's a lot of things that there's no, you know, there's a story, but it's just like A to B kind of thing, not like there's nothing, no backstory. So everything was made up. I didn't really argue much of that, because I realized that there's no way, you know, it's got to be something, you know, we got to come up with a story that works on the screen that doesn't exist in the game, basically.
Mm-hmm. So at which point did the story that eventually ended up carrying the film, like the Double Dragon medallion, the two brothers who are, you know, sort of trying to figure out this power that they have inherited, and the bad guy who's trying to get the other half of the medallion. When did that story come into play? At which point?
I think it was in play with Dini and Schusterman, kind of like in that period, in the very beginning. So I mean, they basically did the whole germ of the idea. The subsequent writers dealt more with taking that story and making it more audience friendly, you know, and also I think a lot of the stuff that Schusterman did was pretty impossible well, it wasn't impossible necessarily, but in those days, you know, with CGI wasn't that great and everything, but Schusterman's film was way more expensive to do, you know, and the Shaw Brothers didn't want to do a movie that was that expensive. You know, I mean, there was all kinds of like aerial stuff and huge scenes, you know, with people, you know, flying on ropes through ceilings and stuff, you know, and I mean, it would have been a real, you know, expensive, long film to make, and probably would have cost, you know, in upwards back then of like 30 to 50 million to do that film. Whereas our film, you know, started with a budget of about like, I think 7 or 8 million and ended up being somewhere around like 12 million or something like, I mean, the problem with the budget on this again is the Shaw Brothers are businessmen. And so they didn't want to spend $50 million or $35 million to do a film. They wanted to spend like $10, you know? And so what they did was they spent, you know, the original budget, I think, was like, you know, somewhere between 5 and 7 million, something like that. But even at that, they said it was 14 million or 12 million, and it really wasn't. They were doing that because they wanted to sell the movie and make it worth more. And it's, you know, so when they went to when they went to sell it, people would say, well, what do you got into it? They'd say, oh, we you know, it's a $14 million film. Well, it really wasn't a $14 million film. It was more like an $8 million film or $7 million film. And a lot of that cost shouldn't even have been incurred because the actors weren't, you know, like these huge stars. Robert Patrick got paid well because, again, Robert Patrick was a friend of Alan Schecter's from the Joel Silver days, the Terminator days. And so he made sure that Robert got paid well, but the other actors got paid, you know, good salaries, but it wasn't like we had high priced talent. The biggest cost was like the special effects and all the stuff that Schechter was building, all these weird tanks and trucks and guns that you don't even really see in the movie, you know, and then you add onto that the fact that we came to Cleveland to shoot, and we started shooting in Cleveland, and it was very expensive because 99% of the crew was from Los Angeles, you know, so you're here in Cleveland for like 8 weeks shooting, and you're shooting, you know, locations are cheaper here, but at one point, you know, the Shaw Brothers stopped the production and said, we're moving back to Los Angeles to shoot the stuff that we need to shoot still, which was the power core headquarters, which is where that was a warehouse in Los Angeles. And when he went into the laboratory and all the monsters were like on the tables and everything, that's in Los Angeles. And the chase with the truck chase scene was in Los Angeles. So that was a little bit of a political move as well, that for the Shaw Brothers to get back at Schechter, because Alan was from Cleveland. Alan wanted to shoot the film in Cleveland, so that's why we were in Cleveland. And Cleveland proved to be too expensive. Even though the locations were cheaper, they didn't have the weather that we needed, and they didn't have all the locations we needed. So the Shaw Brothers, almost to kind of like put Schechter in his place, they said, we're going back to Los Angeles. So we shut down, went back to Los Angeles, and when they got to Los Angeles, they had a huge union problem because what they were paying people in Cleveland wasn't what they were going to be paying people in Los Angeles. And so they had, you know, to negotiate a whole union contract for a couple of weeks. So during those couple of weeks, we basically we built the sets. We built, Shuko's office was also in Los Angeles, but the one with the glass floor, and it was like a 360 degree room. All that was built in Los Angeles. but we basically went there, and I rehearsed the actors for like a couple of days on and off each week, and the DP was there, and like Robert Patrick was there, and Scott and Mark and Alyssa, they would come in, and we would just walk through the scenes, and we'd walk through the scenes with the choreographers and just say, okay, here's what we're going to do here. So we were able to storyboard and block out everything for those scenes, whereas we didn't have the time to do it in Cleveland so much.
Mm-hmm.
Although I still have all the storyboards and everything, because I actually did some as well at that point, because we would add scenes and things, and it's pretty fun I still have the dailies in my vault somewhere, but they were on VHS tapes back then.
Oh, wow.
Which is kind of interesting. But there was a downtime about 3 or 4 weeks before we could start shooting again, and that added cost, kind of because you had to continue the actors. They had to be paid, and so a lot of the overall final costs were kind of stupid things, things that shouldn't have been. That should have been, if the planning was done better in the beginning, and the timing of the start was a little bit pushed back, I think the whole thing would have went smoother.
Mm-hmm. I also read that there was an accident with your original DOP, Tony Mitchell, I think.
Yeah, he was Tony Mitchell. I brought in, and because I always liked Tony Mitchell, and Alan Schechter was a big fan of Tony Mitchell. Tony Mitchell was a DP on a lot of music videos. He did Wild Boys by Duran Duran. I don't know if you ever saw that, which was fantastic. Yeah. And he did Don't Come Around Here No More with Tom Petty, where he was like Alice in Wonderland kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And Tony was a spectacular DP. I think he lasted like 2 days. It was like we were on the set on the river set, which is where the boathouse scene was, and the fight there. And Tony was like the first week of the film, and he was handheld shooting the guys that were climbing up over the chain link fence, and as he had the camera on his shoulder, and he took a step or two up the hill, and he slid down with the camera, and he kind of twisted his back, and so his back was messed up, and then the producers brought in a chiropractor from Cleveland somewhere, and Tony swears that the chiropractor goofed him up more, and so that was like a whole weird thing. But one of the funniest things was Tony was like, he couldn't really walk very well. He was laying down most of the time, and we shot that whole scene. And I don't know how familiar you are, if you know scenes or not from the film, but there's a scene where we had a Luma crane going over the fountains, and all the kids were skating around, and Tony shot that scene operating the wheels to the camera while laying on a stretcher. And yeah, and what was weird is that the crane had to move. And the crane's got like the wires for the camera. The controls are pretty long, but we had grips moving the dolly with the crane on it, and we had grips moving the stretcher with Tony on it. So that when Sunil Shaw, who's the oldest brother, came in and saw that, he said, enough is enough. We got to get another DP. This is we can't do a whole movie like this with a stretcher, So that was pretty funny.
So yeah, and he's probably right. It's I admire the dedication, but I guess I agree that it'd be difficult to do an entire movie like this.
Oh yeah. It was it looked pretty funny. We actually have somewhere, again, we actually have like B-roll. Not B-roll, but we shot behind the scenes videos, and I think that maybe one of the Shaw brothers has them or something. But it was pretty funny to see, and So we brought in Gary Kimby, who, you know, he wasn't a star movie DP, but he could get the job done, and so he came in. And what happened, you know, fortunately, he got us through the movie. But what happened, unfortunately, was that it really lost any style that it could have possibly had with Tony Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, Tony was more of a guy that, you know, you'd set up a scene and you'd tell him, okay, we're going to shoot this scene in this room. He'd walk around and he'd get like one big, like 12K HMI and stick it behind a piece of furniture and light the room interestingly. And that would be it, you know, and that was a kind of his style, where he wouldn't put up a zillion lights. He'd use like one light in the perfect place,
mm-hmm.
you know, and so that was kind of like, I don't know if, again, in the river scene, when the boys are walking down the road in the river, you could see in the weeds, Tony had those mirrors reflecting the sun,
mm-hmm.
and they're in the shot. And the producers were saying they're in the shot, and Tony goes, I want them in the shot. He wanted that kind of like weird, like, what are these things lighting the scene kind of, you know? I mean, it's like, that's the kind of DP that Tony was, and we lost that, you know, when but the other thing that was kind of interesting about the film was the Shaw brothers are Indian, and before, the first thing we shot was the two brothers walking down the road before they end up going into the fight by the river. They're by the river there. That was the very first scene that we shot in the film. Mm-hmm. And before we could shoot that scene, we had to have like this little ceremony, which was pretty funny, where they burn like this candle and they chant something, some kind of Indian prayer. And we had to shoot the first shot exactly at like 10:08 or something. I mean, it was really funny that they were so into this like astrology and I guess it's more of a Hindu Indian kind of practice, but obviously it didn't work out too well.
Well, maybe you started at 10:09 or something.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not putting the blame for this on everybody else, because I feel that there's a lot that I could have done, like I said, to make it better, but I felt, that I was like the new kid on the block, and I really didn't want to jump in and start telling people, what to do, especially with Alan, because Alan was like a close friend, so it was very difficult situation, but I've taken a lot of the blame for myself, but yet now when I look back at it, it's not as bad as I thought it was. If that kind of sounds weird, but it, when we finished it, I thought, oh, it's not bad. And then I didn't see it for a while, and I saw it again. I thought, oh boy, it was stupid, kind of corny bad. But then I look at it and I think, well, there's still moments, that kids would like. And what's really strange is my son was working with somebody that was from like either New Zealand or like one of those little islands out in the Pacific, and they found out that his dad did Double Dragon, and they went crazy because it was like the most popular action movie down there of all time, which was yeah, and in fact he had me sign like a copy of the DVD for him because it was huge for them, and I thought, this is really bizarre that in like one little island, it worked on that island.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I don't think it's a bad movie. I think it has a lot to offer. I think it has a good comic book kind of energy. I think it's fun. It's an enjoyable film. It obviously has its flaws, but I mean, Robert Patrick is a lot of fun as the villain. His scenes are great, I think. And yeah, like I said, it just has that kind of energy, and there's a creativity to it. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is the setting, actually, because this kind of dystopian post-apocalyptic future that it draws, the New Angeles of 2007. I mean, you see like there's an inept police force, and you have gang violence, and you even have a riot. And I was thinking, okay, that movie was shot just a few years after the LA riots, just 1 or 2 years after the LA riots. So I was wondering if that sort of played into the scenario that you drew in the film.
Well, a lot of that was all, I'd attribute most of that whole feeling was Alan Schechter. Because Alan was a survivalist, you know. So I mean, he was always thinking that the world, you know, that somebody's going to take over and the world's going to end and there's going to be terrorism and this, and so, you know, he put in all the, you know, post-apocalyptic things, the Los Angeles, you know, the water being underwater, having fans on the hills to blow the pollution away, all the earthquakes, all that stuff was basically, you know, put in by Alan Schechter. Because I mean, that's basically because Alan was kind of afraid of everything. So I think that was his, you know, his answer to is all, you know, put it all in a movie. Everything he was thinking that we're all going to die with earthquakes, we're all going to die with this, we're all going to, you know, they're going to go underwater. Exactly what you said, the riots, the LA riots probably influenced him as well. And, you know, unfortunately, Alan committed suicide a couple of years ago.
Oh dear!
I don't know if you
know that.
I don't know if you know that, but
no.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was quite a shock. I spoke to him on and off over the years after the movie, and he had done a number of projects, and then I got this message from Ash Shaw that Alan committed suicide, and I called Alan's brother, and in fact, I just spoke to Alan's brother a couple weeks ago just to say hello, and his brother, you know, his brother still can't get over it. You know, I mean, it's like, it's such a shame because Alan was a genius. You know, I mean, he really was. He could have been like the next big movie producer for action movies because he just knew what it took to do these things, and he was working with the Shaw brothers, and they didn't get along because, you know, Alan needed big money and they didn't have big money, or they didn't want to spend big money. And but it's kind of it's a shame. But that's all these fears, basically, of the rioting and all that stuff. I came from, you know, Alan and the weapons and all this, that whole feel of the movie, which is interesting. But again, if you look at it in terms of, okay, in a kids movie, you didn't really need all that stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But yet Alan didn't see it as a kids movie, so he kept throwing in stuff that he wanted it to be the movie that he wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of puts the movie into the same arena like Super Mario and also like Street Fighter, that it has these, you know, all these different influences. Like Super Mario has elements which are really weird and offbeat and kind of dark, and then they have sort of slapstick sequences and everything, so really odd kind of humor. And also Street Fighter has some very over-the-top, like comic book characters and jokes and everything, but it also has tanks and like a Civil War setting and everything. So it's interesting then, with all of these films, apparently was a lot of discussion, like what the tone of the thing would be, and it seems that that sort of pulled everything apart in all three cases, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, the comic book movies, I mean, you know, even me as a viewer, I don't think that they got it right until recently. I mean, I loved the Joker and I loved the Dark Knight, you know, but before that, they just didn't. To me, they didn't quite get it right, and I don't know if it was casting or the writing or what it was, but to me, when you get to now like a movie like the Dark Knight or the Joker, to me that's how they got it right. You know what I mean? It really works like that, you know, and so I think it was just we were part of the learning curve, maybe, you know, all those movies, you know, and also you got to keep in mind that back in those days CGI was really bad. You know, I mean, it was, you know, the technology was just, you know, they had a computer that was doing the stuff that we needed done, like the Shuko shadow and all that stuff. the computer could take the whole room. It could fill the whole room. Just to do that, something that you and I could do on Photoshop right now.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And so all of the movies, not just Double Dragon, but all of them were kind of limited in those days by the technology, because you're talking about movies that are based on technology, and yet the technology wasn't there yet.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And you tried to insert some of the computer technology actually into the movie. Like you have these sequences where you see, like the scene with the car chase, where you have a little computer screen that actually draws like the street and the cars onto a grid, and all the kind of early '90s computer graphics. I mean, that look like
I know they look so dated now, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, you and I could do that with Photoshop or Illustrator easily right now, but back then it took forever. To do that. And the virtual, the when her little brother's playing that virtual thing with the roller coaster, that took forever to do. And and nowadays I can go to the store and buy those Oculus glasses, and I could actually just watch it. So it was, again, it was Alan Schechter saying, okay, in the future people are going to be able to do this, and so he put that in, and it took forever to do it, and it worked. But it was kind of like interesting that he was dead on, because that's what kids are doing now with those glasses here in America. They have those Oculus glasses that they wear.
Yeah, the Oculus.
Oculus, yeah,
thing, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did it. My son's got one, and I watch it. It's pretty interesting because whichever way you turn, obviously you see whatever you see. But it's interesting. You can get TV shows now here that are set up for that. So you could watch shows like that, which is pretty interesting. I mean, in the future there'll probably be all kinds of things like that'll replace movies, where you'll just be able to you'll be in the room with the actors as opposed to seeing, which takes away the direction, because you can look at whatever you want, and which is both good and bad. But it's something that Alan wanted to put in the movie. He always tried to put stuff in that he thought would be, technology for the future. But unfortunately, back then we weren't capable of doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one other thing I wanted to ask you about was the music of the film.
Right.
Because, well, I guess you didn't have a lot of budget for the music, because most of the acts that are on the soundtrack are, well, not really huge acts. I mean, Coolio is on there with a theme song, but did you was that your music selection? Did you have any say in the selection of the music?
I didn't. That was just them trying to get as good as they could for the money that they had, basically. Mm-hmm. And the only say I had was, I think, is the last track. I don't know if you have it in front of you. Is it All Together Now? Is that what it's called? I suggested that one because that's by The Farm, which was this English band that Genesis, my friends Genesis, Phil Collins, and everybody. It was kind of like their project, basically.
Okay.
So I said, well, this would be a good one for the ending, and I did like a rough cut, and I put it on there, and Ash Shaw saw it and said, yeah, that works perfect. So that's how that one got on. But the rest of the stuff, you didn't have much say. I actually chose the composer of the original music, because I thought, it's Jay Ferguson, who was another person that I knew from Los Angeles, who was in a couple bands out here and had done a bunch of little film things. He sent a demo, and I thought it worked. The stuff that he wrote worked perfect for the movie. Mm-hmm. And so they hired, we hired him, and he's actually quite successful now. I mean, he did in America, he did the theme for the TV show The Office, which is very popular. I mean, not the English version, but the American version of The Office. And so I had a say with him. But the stuff that they put on, they just tried to get, like you said, as good artists as they could for the budget.
Mm-hmm. Which artists would you have chosen? Did you have any ideas or suggestions?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would have went to all the people that I know, basically, because I could have, I like the Phil Collins people, and and the Iron Maiden people, and and just different, a little bit, everything from, like a Peter Gabriel to Iron Maiden.
Mm-hmm.
Because just simply because there's plenty of songs that would fit in the movie, as just simply because they fit the scene in the movie. But for some reason that got done as an afterthought. It was, again, one of these weird things where things were done without me even knowing about that. Oh, this is done already. It's kind of like weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be interesting to see that version of the film, that the film that you would have made, like with Tony Mitchell and with the music that you had in mind and the tone that you had in mind.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
So when the movie came out, I mean, I think most of the reviews were pretty negative. I mean, it was called everything from cheesy to stupid to I don't know what.
Yeah.
So how did you experience that?
Well, I figured with that to me, I figured, well, that's it. Okay, it's never gonna go anywhere. It's not gonna do anything. But again, knowing the background, I mean, it bothered me personally, but it also bothered me more that it was what I consider like a bad business mistake. The fact that they targeted the wrong audience, all the things. It kind of like summed up all the things that I was thinking for the whole time period that we were doing it. The things that were being done wrong, like the way that the production was rushed to do this, and how they couldn't agree on what the movie was going to be about, how they couldn't have a script that was done to 90 pages so that we could have shot what everybody liked, and got all those arguments out of the way before we started shooting, and none of that happened. So it's almost like, okay, it's kind of, they got what they deserved. And unfortunately, I got what I deserved because I was part of it.
Mm-hmm.
It was very. I mean, obviously, I felt bad about it, but luckily, I was still doing a lot of other things like television shows and videos and things. So I thought, well, on the next one, I'll do this. But I haven't done it. I mean, I did a small independent movie, but I really, I didn't have that much interest in doing any other films where I was like a hired gun. I thought, okay, I've done that. If I do another film, it's going to be something that I write or that I co-write or come up with an idea for that I really like, that I want to, and I haven't had the time actually to do that. I mean, Mark Brazil and I have done a lot of like brainstorming about different things over the years, and we just haven't done them because we were all both doing our other stuff. But yeah, I don't think. I mean, I was bothered. I mean, it bothered me a lot, but I don't think I wasn't as. I didn't go into like a death spiral or anything, from it. I just thought, well, that's that's kind of like what happens when you do things this way, and you figure you learn from your mistakes. The next time you're going to do something different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was definitely worth, because you really learned. Like I said, I learned from the experience, and it was a great experience, even as tough as it was, and with all the problems, it was a great experience because we had a great crew. Alan and the Shaw brothers were great to work with. They were all very supportive, and it was just, it was kind of like a shame that it didn't work out because everybody that was in place was good at what they did.
Mm-hmm.
Like Mark Amato, who was doing the stunt coordinating and everything. I mean that. He's amazing. He did the Crow and things. I mean, he's like, these. And what's really funny, because all these stunt guys that were in this movie have been in a zillion movies, over the years. And now when I ever since Double Dragon, when I go to see a movie, as soon as I see one of those guys, I know a fight's going to break out. If you're in a restaurant scene, if you've seen a scene in a restaurant, and if I see like one of those guys sitting at a table, I think to myself, okay, somebody's going to get shot or something's going to happen pretty soon, you know.
That's interesting. That's the Double Dragon legacy.
yeah. That you know what's going to happen, but yeah, and then like El Desario, the guy who blew up the river. I mean, this is the guy that blew up the building in Die Hard.
Mm-hmm.
So they were all great people to work with.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have given up that experience. I mean, it was terrific. It's a shame it didn't work out, and I would have done things different. In hindsight, obviously, everybody would have done things different, but you couldn't pay for that experience like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, some of the films like Super Mario Brothers and also Mortal Kombat, they experience some kind of, well, I don't know how to call it. Well, after these years, after 25 years, people revisit them and they have some sort of revival. Like there are now a lot of fans of the Super Mario film, and there's a lot of talk about Mortal Kombat being the best video game adaptation that there's been up to this point.
Right.
So I'm curious if something like that happens to you also with Double Dragon. Like you say, when you said that it was... I don't know what the country was. This little island somewhere in the Pacific. It's their favorite film. Do you have that experience? Do people come up to you and tell you, "Oh, Double Dragon, that was a very cool movie from my childhood," or something like that?
Yeah. Occasionally I do when somebody sees like my credits or something, and they see that and they go, "Oh my gosh," they'll say, "I really like that," And I find that younger kids seem to like, kids that were younger at the time seem to like it the most. But like I said, I've had over the years a number of my son's friends who really liked the movie that didn't know at the time that I did it. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of nice. In terms of revival, I have a couple, of ideas for things that I think could be interesting to do with Double Dragon, and that I'm actually trying to put together now. And I was going to actually get together with the Shaw Brothers and see if they're interested in doing something. But it's got enough now. Years have gone by now that people could look at it and say, this is, because it's not violent at all now. So it's kind of a pretty good kids movie right now, as opposed to 1993, where I guess throwing somebody off of a, like one of those building things was like, violent at that time.
Yeah, I think also back at that point there was a lot of discussion on how violent the video games actually are, and I mean Double Dragon is a pretty violent game, so I think all of that got sort of mixed up in that discussion. I do think it's a great kids movie. It's something that is it's completely harmless. I think there's nothing in there that like an 8 or a 10-year-old wouldn't be able to see and process.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
So yeah, maybe we can expect something new on the Double Dragon front from you.
Hopefully. I mean, I have to get to. I mean, I haven't really spoken to them yet about this, but I had an idea, and I spoke to a couple people about it, and in fact, I spoke to Mark Brazil about it, the third writer on it, and he likes the idea, and so we thought, well, maybe we should talk to the Shaw Brothers and see if they want to do something.
Okay, would this be a movie or some kind of other project?
Well, no, we're thinking of a movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to give it away because I know that sounds corny. I don't want to give it. But if I give it away, then one of the other superhero movies will do it.
Yeah.
Before we do.
I completely understand. But of course, I'm very curious.
Yeah.
So yeah.
As it gets closer, I'll let you know, Christian.